I'm Scott Lachlan. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today, we're talking about AI policy, and in particular, what is happening within the US federal government. For folks who are tracking developments in this space, it can be quite burdensome. There's just so much happening at multiple levels of government. And the federal government is one of those players. Now, we have not seen legislation that is all encapsulating relating to AI policy. We have not seen a comprehensive set of regulations. Instead, we've seen this kind of dueling views of AI development between the Biden administration and now the Trump administration, all issued by executive order, and then moving in the direction of maybe potentially something that is more longstanding. To make sense of all of that, including what has happened most recently with the new Trump executive order, I have invited one of my partners, Sybil Rowenbeck, to the podcast. Sybil is in our government relations practice and represents clients throughout a number of industries, and in particular in the health and life sciences sector, make sense of what is happening with respect to AI policy. She spends her days working with clients, not only understand what's happening, but also to engage in the process and let their unique perspectives be known for those to be addressed as part of the policymaking process. Sybil, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Sybil, I know this is an area in which you spend a lot of time with clients, but I'm maybe if we just start taking a step back and trying to put the more recent developments within the Trump administration in context. The Trump administration is not the first administration that has tried to establish AI policy through executive order. The Biden administration has tried that. Maybe from your perspective, where have we come from in the past few years from the transition from Biden's executive order to where we are today?
Sure. So one of the first things actually that President Trump did was rescind a whole number of executive orders, one of which was the AI order. So it has been interesting seeing the different ways that the administrations have approached this issue. Under President Biden's administration, there was a larger focus on frameworks that would be directed towards safety, towards bias mitigation. There was a lot around how do we make sure that the models are safe for consumers. And so really, even though we didn't see any hard regulations, we didn't see any statute coming out of that whole time that Biden was in office and out of that Congress, we did get a lot of quote unquote frameworks that really, like many frameworks, have little teeth. But the emphasis certainly there was on some of the issues that really were cross-industry at the time, issues like equity and ensuring that bias was mitigated. And that really is kind of where it stopped. I do think that the Biden administration really also included some messaging around American innovation. But of course, when President Trump came in, phrases like unleashing innovation and pulling back on, regulatory roadblocks, those sorts of things really became much more the focus when President Trump came in. And so really, for the last year and a half, it's been how can we incentivize companies to innovate in this area? How can we make sure that red tape isn't pulling them back? But as some of the AI companies have really flourished or looked for ways to not only develop new models and augment existing models, but commercialize in new industry areas, we've had sort of a very light touch regulatory regime and very little in statute to pull that back. And really, we've seen a very stark difference between what we had under President Biden's watch, which was kind of quiet, but the focus was on safety, versus where we are now, where the focus is really on commercialization and competitiveness, American competitiveness globally.
So one of the things I remember from the Biden executive order was that it presented, basically asked like every agency, or many agencies, I guess I should say, to do all this deep thinking about how AI is impacting, their specific area of focus, and then start to develop out either guidelines or regulations or, different types of policy initiatives to actually implement that. And again, my recollection here is a bit foggy, but I don't believe that many actually turned into anything other than telling them to do it, and nothing really happened as a result of that. So all of that, call it red tape, call it all the additional policy that was intended, just never kind of materialized. And then the Trump executive order kind of reshaped things as you were describing it, turning much more into a focus around innovation and competitiveness. Also introduced new ideas about what bias means, including kind of bias around ideological bias and political
Mhm.
bias. Have you seen that executive order result in kind of tangible differences, right? Or does it seem like, hey, this is just now a directional view about where we would like the federal government to go, but it hasn't resulted in a lot of new either requirements or differences in companies day to day, either as users of AI or developers of AI?
No, 100%. And I just recalling the Biden piece, I think some agencies turned in their reports, others didn't. I know at one agency at HHS, it resulted in a lot of just extra reporting for AI developers, kind of integrated into some regs there, but there was not a lot of teeth. So we have seen with the Trump administration, this early EO came out. We've had a few others that hit on the topic since then. And the agencies, I think, because of the national directive from the president, but also just because of the way that we're all working and all of our work habits are changing with the advent of AI and really getting that integrated into what we do, we have seen a lot more actionable use of AI at the agencies. And so many of the agencies are looking at ways, I think, like the low hanging fruit for the agencies is how can we get AI systems that actually make us as agencies function better? So, not even getting to the how do we regulate our specific industry area and their use of AI, but how do we integrate AI into what we're doing? And through that, I think there have been a lot of learnings that when you're working with a legacy system, it can be complicated to try to pull on new AI tech. When you're working with a workforce that's had a certain way that they're doing something, pulling something new in, there's a learning curve. And so I think as a concept, AI has been embraced a lot more. And as we've looked at also shifts in the federal agencies related to workforce and related to emphasis on things like fraud mitigation and reducing costs, certainly AI has been something that the agencies have embraced in a much more active way in the way that they go about doing their work. And in turn, I see as sort of the next phase, agencies looking at how the companies and industries that they regulate are utilizing AI and looking toward that. And of course, that's going to be the subject of the work over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point because, in some ways, the government embracing AI is they're going to suffer from some of the same challenges that many of our clients face as they're trying to make this transition. And it's not a snap of the fingers by any means, right? It's not just, hey, here's a new chatbot. Now make sure you do double the amount of work. Like that's not exactly the way that this actually goes. And then, on top of that, the other thing that you mentioned, which is important, is that you have a bunch of people who are not necessarily equipped to know how to use AI in their day to day. It's not like everybody fully understands this immediately. And so there's a big kind of skill gap almost. Right. So
Yes.
that the size of the federal government, you can see is like maybe that's just a big issue, but a lot of our clients would immediately see it the same way that they are suffering from those same challenges. And the other thing I heard you say that is also worth emphasizing is that government wants to be a user of the AI technology. And I think one of the things that came through both the Biden and Trump executive orders was around trying to establish AI policymaking through federal government contracting and trying to establish kind of what the government thinks of as the minimum standards for AI, not because they don't have an act of Congress, but instead to say, hey, you developer promise to do X, Y, and Z in your development and ongoing operation.
100%. And I think, we also have a lot of legacy on the government contracting piece, a lot of legacy contractors who have been really embedded within the agencies, and some have maintained long-standing systems. And then you have other companies that are sort of new entrants that are going to the agencies to talk with them about tools that they've newly developed. So there's a lot of shifts there, I think, as well. And we've seen that in some of the ways that the agencies want to, they have these key initiatives that they're working on, and they're open to working, either with their legacy partners or with new companies and contractors to achieve those. And I think that that's going to really take up a lot of headspace, really, for the executive branch for the next year or so, just getting those things online while the president is in office before we even get to, let's change the Code of Federal Regulations as it relates to energy, for AI tools. That's a much, much bigger project. So it'll be interesting to see how much they can do during the president's term.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably the frustration almost of every president. It's almost like you need
Right.
a whole lot more time to implement the change needed. But, I think one of the things that is probably bipartisan support for is that AI is an area that promises a great deal of potential benefit for society, but also presents some unique harms that need to be addressed. And there could be difference of opinion about how to do them, but I think there's a consensus that those things do need kind of some level of either oversight or at least kind of management, whether that's through the private sector or through the public policy. I think we're seeing that certainly at the state level, where a number of states are legislating on this, some in very specific ways, some broadly. We're seeing that outside of the United States, within the EU in particular, and China and some other countries that are going through broad legislative developments. We have not seen that yet play out at the federal level, although I have a question for you about that later. But there's still that angst. And I think that really kind of started to captivate the national attention when, one of the big solutions mythos was announced and presented a possibility of unique cybersecurity concerns that may have impacted many businesses. And I know that captured the attention of the government, captured the attention of the news. And so interested in hearing how you saw that develop and then how that may have materialized into additional thinking around how AI policy will develop through executive orders.
Yes. I mean, I think the things you listed have all been mounting pressure. So on the federal level, this question of AI regulation and the need for something on the federal level to either mitigate what was becoming and is a patchwork of state laws, and also give just a more unified view of what companies could do, that really came to a head last year when we were considering the AI moratorium in the Congress, which was an idea that was kind of batted around, introduced, potentially was going to be put in a few different moving legislative vehicles. What happened there was we had different industries that kind of came out, went to their relevant senator or congressperson and said, if we do some sort of moratorium, which only basically precludes the effect of state law until we have a federal regime in place, that's going to be problematic for our specific industry. So that idea, while still I don't think is completely dead, that was one mounting pressure, I think, on the federal level that gave people notice we're going to have to do something in this area. In addition to that, we've had a lot of concerns around competitiveness globally, as you mentioned. So there are umpteenth bills in the Congress, and also a lot of attention being paid from the administration on our competitiveness with China in a number of different areas. But principally, this AI area is one that's kind of a pet favorite for a lot of the members of Congress to talk about. We want to make sure that we are being competitive with globally, but also that we are maintaining the security of United States data and consumer data. So that's been a big topic. And we also have had a number of, like you said, specific instances where there's been concern that we don't have some kind of guidance or framework in place that's actionable for the companies. So the need to do something, I think, has been mounting, but even if you're just looking in one small industry area, we lead a coalition here at the firm, the AI Healthcare Coalition, just looking at AI tools for healthcare. Once you start to come up with a framework, there's a lot of other questions that come up, right? And it's very complex to think about the overlay of existing regulatory schemes. All of these industries are heavily regulated, and put kind of an AI piece on top of that, plus like a data piece, plus an energy piece. So it gets complicated quickly. And I think that that's one reason that we haven't seen something really emerge yet that people can coalesce around. But the concerns and sort of pressure to do something and come up with something has definitely been mounting for the past couple years, but came to a head, as you said earlier this year, when there were specific concerns around the sensitivity and security of corporate data due to what could be a very widely used application.
So I think it's a really good summary around kind of how we got to maybe closer to where we are today. But, then there was kind of a unique policy proposal, perhaps, that, came out from the administration, which, had been analogized to more of the FDA style part of review, where, different types of AI models would be subject to effectively government scrutiny and government approval before it's released, which was kind of an interesting, approach to trying to address this set of issues. Interested in your perspective on what that would look like and perhaps what the reaction was of the community to that type of policy.
Well, I think it depends. It's not, I think AI developers and others in this space, it's not a monolith. So if you're able to write the regulations in a way that helps you, it can be great, right? But if you are not part of the conversation, you can really get left out in the cold. And so I think there's obviously so much interest and the applicability of some sort of pre-review, which is what was contemplated, and is continues to be contemplated, I think is in one hand, concerning for a lot of innovators, but on the other hand, at least would give you some idea of what the rules of the road are going to be. And having a playbook can often, when you're trying to commercialize a new product, actually be quite helpful if you have that indicia of approval. So it kind of depends what the approval is going to be. I think politically, it's also somewhat fraught because once you come up with a government scheme to regulate, and you leave office, somebody else has that same scheme to regulate, the companies that really supported you to begin with. So there can be issues with that, with not being exact enough if you're kind of in that middle area. There was a lot of hype around this and a lot of intrigue around what was going on. There was a draft executive order that was released, leaked, and it actually mirrors quite closely what we eventually saw come out of the White House. But I think there's been a lot of sort of interest in just being a part of the conversation to develop whatever this framework would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, and you can certainly see the upside. I 100% agree. Like, many organizations operating in and around this space would appreciate standard settings that are clear and, have some level of legitimacy because, as you know, if you are in the space, everybody's adding AI to whatever it is they do, and whether that's really AI or not, that's a question that you have to then start to dig into, and it's left to on a kind of partnership by partnership basis to understand how the AI works. In some ways, the clarity that, an FDA style review process could help, put all of that scrutiny into the hands of one group who then disseminates it and provides some level of trust that can then be relied upon by third parties. So you can imagine that that would be really interesting. From a practical perspective, I would be very interested to figure out what does that look like to move from where we are today to having people in government be the ones to understand how this technology works and be the arbiters around how they are going to apply whatever standards that I don't even think exist. So probably several miles to go before we even get to the last mile of implementation of something like that. Was that something that was being thought through, or was this more of like a big idea that later was going to be implemented and we didn't want to get to the implementation details yet?
I mean, I think it's been thought through, but there's a lot of pressure to do something. So, we are as a political matter, we're heading into the midterms. We're already closely watching a lot of primary elections that are taking place across the country. The polling on AI, it's bad, right? There's a lot of concern that the average constituent is concerned about loss of work, They're concerned about energy costs. Every day there seems to be a new video of somebody that's concerned about, a new energy line being put through their backyard. There's a lot of focus on this as a kind of kitchen. It's become like a kitchen table topic, is what they would call it. And so I think for the executive branch and also for the Congress, there's a thought of like, what are we going to say that we're doing on this, right? Because we're going to get this question when we're in our town halls, when we're on the stump, when we're campaigning throughout the summer and fall. We are going to get this question. And so to just say, well, we're still working on it's not great. So having something to point to, I think, as a political matter is helpful. The question is that going to be helpful in the long run for many companies? Think about most of our industry areas. So you brought up FDA. Many of the, artificial intelligence type tools that are utilized in healthcare, they're already heavily regulated by a number of government entities. So are we going to put another layer of regulation on top of that? What does that look like? And does that even make sense when you're talking about so many different things that could potentially be AI? A lot of the discussion recently has been focused really on frontier models, but as some of those companies that are sort of the leading larger companies that you think about when you think about AI, big tech, those companies are developing also models in the spaces of, discrete industries. And so are they going to be subject to not only all the regulatory oversight that we have now, but a whole nother layer? It suddenly becomes not profitable, right? So that's the concern, like striking that right balance. And I think as we look towards other parts of the globe, we have seen many companies move out of other jurisdictions where they were too quick to potentially to adopt an AI regulation or AI statute, and are now having to kind of roll back what they initially came out with because it was killing innovation within their jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that feels like at bottom the conundrum that we are in, right? It was like everyone thinks we should do something, but nobody can agree about what it is that we should actually do,
Right.
especially
Yeah.
given, that many organizations think that AI can promise all sorts of new efficiencies and in an advanced society in new and unique ways. So my guess is, and you're closer to this than I am, but my guess is that once this draft EO is leaked, gets all of that coverage, lots of feedback is coming in from the
Yes.
various stakeholders that this would apply to directly, especially kind of businesses who are on the development side of AI. And then the White House, kind of pulls back, I think, a little bit into a different approach that now turns into a final executive order. How does that final executive order look? And, what do you see as kind of the notable developments compared to where we've started in the first days of the administration?
Right. Well, it's been sort of discussed as though it was, so we did have the executive order. It came out on June 2nd, so just earlier this week. And it's been described as, quite pulled back from what was originally in there. But honestly, if you do a red line between the two documents, which is, one of my favorite things to do is red line things, it's really not all that different. But there are some key changes that I think are worth pointing out. So much of the discussion here has been focused on so-called frontier labs or frontier AI companies, which are some of the larger companies that you might think of when you think of a generative type AI application. So there was this concept in the draft that they would have, like you described, some sort of engagement and a framework through which certain models would need to flow and be essentially reviewed before they're released to the public. In the original draft and discussion, a lot of rumor around the original draft, there was concern that that could be mandatory. And in the executive order that's been released, we actually have a voluntary framework. So we will see what that means. It may be that having that check next to your model actually, is a very positive thing in terms of commercialization, or it might be something that doesn't have a lot of effect. And it depends also what that framework is. It's spelled out a little bit in the executive order, but it's a lot of sort of deferring to the agencies and asking the agencies to write things that would be most helpful to them, and specifically Department of War and other groups within the Department of Commerce. So that was one piece, this concept of would such a government executive branch check be voluntary or mandatory? In addition, there's this concept in the executive order that the model should be provided and shared with the executive branch prior to public release. And this was a big concept that was discussed prior to the release of either the leaked or the final executive order. And what we see in the leaked executive order was that originally the thought had been that the government would have 90 days before public release to look at the model. That's been modified to 30 days in the final executive order that was released by the White House. So 30 days before public release, Frontier model would share that model with the executive branch for them to look and sort of put them through the steps of this framework. There's a lot of requirements for the agencies to sort of get back with their specific plans pursuant to this executive order within a month or within 60 days. My experience with executive orders is we often see the agencies blow past those deadlines. But insofar as this has been synced up a lot prior to release, we could see, the executive order being sort of the thin edge of the wedge in terms of how much we're going to see actually come out of these agencies and more detail about what the frameworks would look like for these particular agency functions.
So super helpful. And I think maybe from your point of view, is trying to see where members and senators are thinking that, they're going to get the pushback during this election cycle. Is this executive order really the thing that people would point back to in those conversations? And do you see that that's going to be enough up until election day, or do you anticipate that there will be other shoes that would drop?
So, as with most things in politics, it depends. If you have a heavily MAGA candidate who's happy to say on the stump, well, the president has just released this great new executive order, and I'm working with the president to make sure that this works well for all the companies in our state and our district, that could very well be enough. And to talk about the things that are included there, there's enough in terms of sort of checks and balances on AI that can be discussed, that I think that's definitely enough. Just today, there was a new development legislatively, and this could be helpful for members who feel like they have to say more, or for Democrat members. So there was a new bill just that just released today that it's quite long, and we're still analyzing it, but it would include a whole number of other checks related to AI, and this has been a long anticipated piece of legislation. Representative Obernolte, who was formerly the head of the House AI task force, released this, and it'll be interesting to see if it can progress, if it can move. We often see, especially for bills that are quite lengthy, that there's been a lot of thought going into what they say and what they do. But we also often see with quite lengthy bills that they sit there Congress after Congress. And so it's a great thing to talk about, but it never passes. So it's still unclear how that piece of legislation will be received, both by the leadership in the House and Senate, the current leadership, as well as the minority party, and if it can advance. But now we do have a significant piece of legislation that's just emerged, in addition to other AI legislation we already had in the areas of sort of chatbots and other things that members can talk about in the lead up to their races if they would like to.
Yeah, I think that's helpful kind of frame for the picture, given that we have executive orders, we have the bills, probably multiple bills that will be coming out that are probably looking like this. You have the state law kind of underlay that where you see actually real legislation being passed currently and that are currently in effect or soon will be come into effect. And so there's a lot of swirl. That patchwork that you described a moment ago is the real deal here. As organizations are looking to figure out either how to make sense of all of that, or maybe more importantly, to say, listen, this area of policy is core to our future, and thus we need to be engaged in the direction of this. Interested in how you're seeing clients react to that problem. Are they trying to get involved with looking at, the executive order as you're describing with the voluntary framework, getting involved in figuring out how to implement something like that and try to stand up something brand new, or to be involved in the federal legislation, the state legislation, all of the above, maybe interested in kind of just how you're seeing private industry have its voice be heard as the policy of this very important area is being shaped in real time.
So I think there's different levels. So for the larger companies that have really, many of them have already been involved in developing this framework concept and this sort of voluntary disclosure before release concept, they are way ahead in terms of their planning on what this could look like. I would say for some of the medium-sized companies all the way to the AI startups, they're sort of watching what's going to happen with that, but they're more concerned with existing laws on the books that are thwarting their ability to commercialize their AI product. They're more concerned with basically updating outdated statutes and regulations, which are problematic for them, and fitting into existing regulatory schemes. And so what we're seeing is a few bills getting introduced, and a lot of pitches to the executive branch around, regulatory flexibility to allow AI to thrive, less on the regulation, more on the flexibility piece. And sometimes we're not even using the word AI, artificial intelligence, because it carries so much weight with it. And if you want to talk about your specific service using your software, you don't necessarily have to use that term. And, sometimes it's to your benefit just to think, I'm not going to boil the ocean here with all AI regulation. What is my company's specific problem, and how can I go in and execute on that problem in a way that makes sense? These agencies are looking for wins in the area of digital and in terms of regulatory streamlining and cost reduction. And a lot of these tools can check those boxes for regulators and for politicals at the agencies. So I think that a more targeted approach is what we're seeing a lot of our clients take rather than trying to engage in the overall discussion. And, we also have a lot of clients that are just taking up a lot of time trying to monitor what's happening in all the states. The endless AG letters that are coming out, the governor letters. It's a lot to keep up with, which again kind of underscores the need for some sort of federal action.
Yeah, that I think is an important point. And then maybe just to emphasize one of the things you're saying around kind of how people are looking at this from different lenses. You had mentioned earlier that there are so many other non-AI specific policies and issues that are being raised by AI, right? So some of the ones you mentioned was around national security. And you see Congress now looking at like, well, to what extent is there risk by US companies using Chinese AI? And that's gotten into this kind of US China dynamic that has a lot of
Mhm.
baggage to it. Are raising, raise the idea of like, well, now we got people's power lines in backyards. And what does this mean for energy debates? Like, obviously AI is very much tied to energy policy. And energy policy is not something that there is a broad consensus on to begin with. And how is it that we are addressing carbon footprints and environmental damage and sustainability, and lots of other issues then get pulled into this. You're seeing kind of issues that are around like employment and bias. You're seeing issues around kids, and like online safety, around this. So there's just so much, right? Like so many areas that AI is raising that it's really difficult to have the broad conversation in the way that maybe other governments feel like they can either have, or that, the US government has struggled with.
100%. I sometimes think about it like my three children, they're all in school, and I always think of their educators as much smarter than I am and way ahead of me in all things. And I've seen the school's AI policies change over the years, just the last couple of years. but from sort of a more, and many companies obviously have this too, we're not going to use it. We're going to disclose if we're using it, or everyone can use it as long as you do X, Y, and Z with it. To what I'm seeing it coalesce around now is talk to your individual teacher. It's different for every class. And I think that that's what we'll see with these industries. It's very different based on what you're talking about. Utilizing AI to interact with a patient, which is a lot of the work that I do, is completely different than issues related to data centers and energy usage of AI, or national security capabilities around cyber and the utilization of AI there. I mean, they're vastly different topics, even though they all can fall within this umbrella. And so I think we'll see a lot more differentiation, and it really is going to depend on like what AI are you talking about? Not just what kind of model is this, but how is it being deployed? What is the use case? What is the impact on the consumer?
I think that's a really good point, and my guess is that it's going to look very different for very different people, and the fact that we are in a position where AI is offering all sorts of efficiencies, but we can't get the policy right, could very well get in our own way of unlocking those efficiencies. So maybe my last question for you, Sybil, is you're a company, you have a lot of clients who are in the space of development of artificial intelligence, and launch of AI enabled products and services. They come to you and say like, hey, we're just seeing so much noise here. We don't know how is it that we can get our arms around all of the things that are happening, what the implications are for our business, and how is it that we can start to direct our business in a way that's going to navigate all of this competing priorities. From your perspective, how do you try to get into that conversation with the client, and any key takeaways that you would want to share, with our audience?
Sure. I mean, I think there are vastly more opportunities right now to do things than we had in the last administration, and that we potentially could have in the next administration. So one founding precept is no idea is too crazy, which is normally not something we would say. There's a lot of openness and receptivity from the folks that we work with in the administration and on Capitol Hill to think about new ideas, to introduce a bill on a concept that maybe, the member hadn't really thought about before last year. So there's a ton of opportunity in open space and greenfield. We try to help clients think about whether you're trying to go and, sell your AI tool to the government, whether you're trying to get the government to revise, repeal, or create a new regulation or law to allow you to commercialize your AI tool. Or whether you're looking to just really participate in a lot of the important underlying work that's going around standards development and engagement with other stakeholders in this space, and sort of that sub-regulatory piece. We really, I think, have been able to help clients come up with a curated solution that's specific to their product, and not waste a lot of time kind of trying to wade through the larger national issues if they don't really pertain to them. So it's been interesting. It's been exciting. And we've seen a lot of really cool ideas and initiatives come out of this administration that do have teeth. I think this executive order is going to lead to a lot of interesting work for companies, and a lot more opportunities too. So it's a very exciting time to be doing this work.
I agree with that. And maybe if I would add one more thing that I know you do, is that one of the lessons that I've learned in speaking with you about these topics in the past is that it is very hard to go alone, right? It's very hard to, be the only voice in the room and have any difference. But the larger group you can pull together with the more voices that are participating, and has an amplifying effect, in terms of your ability of directing, which I know is part of what you do with the Healthcare Coalition. Interested in your perspectives, as your one of the things I think I know you do is kind of help bring company X and company Y, who may not know each other but also see the world in a very similar way, and say, hey, you all actually agree on this area that could be really helpful to bring that point of view to a group of policyholders.
Yes, 100%. So we started the AI Healthcare Coalition in 2018. And we really try to have a consistent voice for developers and others in the ecosystem of AI health. We have just come off of our big annual conference, and we'll be having a lot more sort of the thought leadership and recaps of our sessions from that AI Health Law and Policy Conference on our website coming up in the coming weeks. We did have some great sessions with folks from the Administrator Oz's office, others from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services sort of payment staff, and folks from Capitol Hill talking about work that they're doing in this space. So one thing that we really try to do is have a voice and maybe speak up about topics when a company doesn't necessarily want to be out there talking about something just on behalf of their company, but rather we can share that this is a problem, an issue, an initiative, a goal of multiple companies. It allows us to have a conversation with the regulator or member of Congress at a little bit of a higher level. And I think has been a really great advocacy tool for the members of that coalition.
Yes, having known many of them, I think they all agree with that sentiment, Sybil. Well, really appreciate your time today, sharing kind of your wisdom and experience with our audience, and hopefully we'll have you back to talk about the future of AI development as this space really develops all around us.
Thank you, Scott.
With that, I'm Scott Lachlan. This is the Data Chronicles, and those were your data points.